answers that are often given. One is that Israel is a vital strategic asset for the United States, or secondly, that it's a democracy that shares the same values as the United States. I think if you step back from those two explanations and look at them carefully, they don't, in fact, explain why we have a special relationship. With respect to the first one, Israel may have been a strategic asset during the Cold War. You can make that argument, but of course the Cold War is now over. The United States does benefit from some forms of strategic cooperation with Israel, but it's hard to argue that giving it nearly unconditional backing today is making the United States more popular around the world or making Americans safer here at home. For one thing, the combination of unconditional American support and Israel's continued occupation of Palestinian lands generates great anger and resentment in the Arab and Muslim world, is one of the key sources of American extremism, and that includes inspiration for groups like Al-Qaeda. I'm not saying it's the only reason, but it's clearly one of the important ones. On balance now, that special relationship is in fact a strategic liability for the United States, not an asset. Now, as for the claim that Israel is a democracy that shares our values, yes, it is a vibrant democracy, but of course there are lots of other democracies around the world, and none of them gets as much support and with so few strings attached. Plus, the basis for Israeli democracy and American democracy are somewhat different. Israel was explicitly founded as a Jewish state. Non-Jews are treated as second-class citizens there, both de facto and de jure. By contrast, the United States is a liberal democracy, where citizens of any race or religion are supposed to have completely equal rights. Now, we know that the United States falls short of that ideal, frequently, you could argue. My point is that the core principles of Israeli and American democracy are not identical. We don't think of the United States as an Anglo-Saxon state or a Christian state. Plus, Israel's treatment of its Arab citizens and its Palestinian subjects is sharply at odds with American values. By the way, I'm not saying that American democracy is superior to Israeli democracy, just that the political values of the two states are not identical. Finally, Israel's behavior is not significantly better than that of the Palestinians or of other states for that matter. Any reasonably fair-minded look at the history of this region, and that includes the histories written by Israeli historians, especially recently, shows that both sides of this conflict have done lots of cruel things to one another. Neither side owns the moral high ground here. It's wrong for Hamas to fire rockets into Israel, but it's also wrong for Israel to impose a cruel blockade on Gaza, to bombard its population, killing over 1,300 people earlier this year, many of them women and children. Oh, if one reads the recent Goldstone report, or the earlier assessments by groups like Amnesty International, or the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, it makes it clear that Israel's behavior is frequently quite disturbing. Now again, I am not saying Israel acts worse than other countries do, including the United States. Rather, I'm saying it doesn't act any better. And so you can't explain or justify the special relationship on that basis. Again, I want to emphasize one more time that I think there is a strong moral case for Israel's existence, but its existence is not in jeopardy at present, and past crimes against the Jewish people don't justify giving Israel a blank check now. So here's the puzzle. If you can't explain the special relationship on strategic or moral grounds, what is the explanation? In my view, it's primarily domestic politics here in the United States and the political influence of the lobby. And here it's important, again, to understand that interest groups are the way American politics works. They're at the center of political life here. It's basically the way the Founding Fathers set it up. We have a divided system of government. Power is very decentralized. Freedom of association and freedom of speech are guaranteed, so individuals and groups can participate in the political process and try and shape political outcomes. Special interest groups of all kinds have many avenues of access into government. You can pressure the executive branch, you can try to get people elected to Congress who will back your positions. And of course, in America, money is critical to political success, millions of dollars being given to candidates and parties, and rather loosely regulated, to say the least. What that means is that lobbies and interest groups can be very influential on lots of different issues, whether it's it's healthcare, agricultural policy, economic policy, or foreign policy, and of course that's certainly the case when we come to the Middle East. So let me say a little bit about what the lobby is and how it works. We define the lobby as a loose coalition of individuals and groups that works openly to influence American foreign policy in a pro-Israel direction, and in particular to maintain that special relationship of unconditional support. I'm thinking of organizations like AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the Anti-Defamation League, Christian Zionist groups like Christians United for Israel, think tanks like the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, publications like the Weekly Standard, New Republic. Now, when you think of it, that's a rather broad definition of a lobby, broad definition of an interest group. But then if you think about other interest groups, it's really not very different. The environmental movement in the United States isn't just the Sierra Club. It isn't just Greenpeace. It also includes research groups of various types, think tanks in Washington, academics who write on environmental questions, or journalists who do, the same way that the pro-Israel movement, or the Israel lobby does, has lots of different pieces. The lobby also does not include anyone who happens to have a favorable opinion of Israel. You actually have to be actively working. You have to devote some part of your daily life to deliberately and actively trying to preserve that special relationship. Just having a certain affinity wouldn't make you part of the lobby, in our view. It's not a centralized organization. The groups that make it up do not agree on every single issue, and it is certainly not a cabal or conspiracy to control U.S. policy. It's, again, just an interest group that operates the same way lots of other interest groups do. Its actions, in short, are as American as apple pie. Now, one final point here. The lobby is not synonymous with Jewish Americans. If you look at surveys of the American Jewish community, about a quarter to a third, don't seem to care much about Israel one way or the other. It's just not a salient issue for them. Others do not support the positions taken by some of the biggest and most powerful organizations in the lobby. And some of the groups and individuals that work to maintain the special relationship, such as the so-called Christian Zionists, aren't Jewish at all. So the lobby is defined by its political agenda, that special relationship, not by ethnicity, not by religion, or anything like that. So how does it work? Well, as I said a moment ago, in the American political system, even relatively small groups can have a lot of influence, especially if they care a lot about a single issue, are willing to work very hard on that issue, and the rest of the population is more or less indifferent. Why? Because politicians can win the support of this one focused group by doing what they want without losing anybody else's backing. Again, think of the National Rifle Association, think of the farm lobby. Even better example. We do an awful lot of things to promote agriculture, and yet only 2% of the American population now are farmers. And yet every year we have a big farm bill that's basically a big giveaway to them. The Israel lobby is not all that different, and like a lot of other interest groups, it works in two main ways. First, it tries to get sympathetic people elected to office or appointed to key positions in the executive branch, and once they're there, it tries to give them clear incentives to follow the policies that these groups want. At the same time, it also tries to make sure that people who think differently on these issues do not get elected or do not get appointed to key positions. So earlier this year, when the Director of National Intelligence, Dennis Blair, wanted to appoint Charles Freeman, a longtime public servant and diplomat with a very distinguished record, wanted to appoint him to be chair of the National Intelligence Committee, which coordinates intelligence assessments. Freeman had been critical of certain Israeli policies in the past, and various groups in the lobby mounted a wide-ranging attack on him, led by pro-Israel journalists, former AIPAC officials. It was backed quietly by AIPAC itself, by politicians like Charles Schumer and Joe Lieberman, and eventually Freeman was forced to withdraw his name. The lobby did not want someone like Freeman in a position of high responsibility. Now you might ask, why are politicians so responsive? Well, just to take AIPAC for example, AIPAC's annual budget is about $50 million a year. It's very active on Capitol Hill. It helps draft legislation for congressmen, provides them with talking points they can use when they have to go talk to their constituents. It writes letters for them to sign.